Hello again, and welcome back for part 2 of Revelation in our study of the Fulfilling Reign studies. This will be episode 9, and we've got one episode left. That's episode 10, which we're going to be doing just a basic recap of everything, and then we'll be on to a new study. So more on that when episode 10 comes out. As for this one, it's just going to be a continuation of episode 9, which was kind of a preparation for Revelation. So I talked about the world that we would be kind of living in when we get to Revelation, and all of the characters at play. So we want to talk about who are these characters, where do they come from, and what is the nature of them. And what does that mean for us? Because as you know, this whole study has been about the giants of antiquity, the Nephilim and their fallen heavenly host fathers. And so to kind of tag on to what I was talking about in the last episode, a lot of people believe that this man of sin, who will be the Antichrist in the final days, is what we would describe as a modern-day Nephilim. That we know that Satan always tries to counterfeit Christ. He tries to counterfeit God because he wants to be like God. He wants to exalt his throne above the stars of God. And so, just as Jesus was God made man, in like manner, the Antichrist is going to basically be the son of the devil, the son of Satan, and possibly will even have some sort of genetic material of the dragon. How that will be made possible, I have no idea. But so in some ways, this would make him a Nephilim. If the Watchers could do it all the way back then, it serves to suggest that something like it could be done in the end times. Now we know that those Watchers are imprisoned, but during Revelation, these Watchers are set free. The bottomless pit is opened, and everything that is imprisoned down there is set loose for a time. So we're looking at these characters and what they might have in common with the giants of old, and with the demons that are roaming the earth right now, because we know that their doom is to roam the earth until Judgment Day. So we know that they will be at play in the end times, as is described in the book of Revelation as well. So I want to kind of talk about that a bit. And just as you can look through the Bible and you can see all these patriarchs like Adam to Abraham to Moses to David, and all throughout you get these people, Joseph in Egypt, you get all of these people who are kind of foreshadowings of who Jesus is going to be in the New Testament. So they have qualities that we find in Jesus, but they don't have all of it. They don't have the encompassing nature that Christ had. In the same manner, we have men all throughout the Bible who have qualities of the man of sin. Not all of them. And so just like you had prototypes, or foreshadowings would be a better word, of who Christ would be, you had prototypes of the man of sin. It's almost as if Satan was kind of tweaking with his chosen men along the way and seeing what works, what doesn't, and kind of trying to perfect his chosen man of sin to be his representative on the earth. So before we get into that, I want to talk real quick about about a chapter in Isaiah. And this is why I think it's important to look at different translations of Scripture, because whereas the content is always there in all of them, the wording of it may be different, and sometimes that wording and how it is worded is extremely important. So I want to read you, this one is an ESV version, but I want to read you really quick this passage. This is about the judgment of Babylon, and it's in the book of Isaiah. It's chapter 13, and we know that Babylon is talked about in the book of Revelation. It's kind of a symbol for what the world has become. It has also been applied to various nations, even Israel, even Jerusalem has been called Babylon when they are in a state of disobedience against God, in a state of rebellion. Israel has also been called Egypt at times, or Sodom, because it's a way of placing a symbol over something to key you back to a time in the past when God proclaimed a judgment over a particular city. And so they're using that as a reference, using that as a symbol to kind of touch on the nature of a nation at a given point in time. But this is about the judgment of Babylon. So this is a portion of Isaiah that contains a prophecy about the fall of the literal Babylon, but it can also talk about the spiritual Babylon and the nations that are going to be representing Babylon in Revelation, in the time in the future. So this is what it says, and I'm only going to read you verses 1 through 3. So this is what it says. On a bare hill raise a signal, cry aloud to them, wave the hand for them to enter the gates of the nobles. I myself have commanded my consecrated ones, and have summoned my mighty men to execute my anger, my proudly exulting ones. Okay. So there's a footnote here beside the proudly exulting ones, and you go down and it says, or those who exult in my majesty. Now, the thing is that Babylon never exulted in God's majesty, except when Nebuchadnezzar fell before the Lord and proclaimed that there was none like he. And he basically repented of being boastful and haughty and proclaiming, I've built all this, and this is mine, and I am the king. But other than that, like, the kingdom of Babylon as a whole, all throughout history, was never really a God-fearing nation or city-state. So that's kind of confusing when I read this, my proudly exulting ones, because there's another translation of it that reads very differently, and you'll see why I wanted to incorporate that one in a minute. The translation for the other one says this, on a bare hill, raise the signal, call to them, beckon with the hand, open the gates, ye rulers, I give command and I bring them. Giants are coming to fulfill my wrath. Rejoicing and at the same time insulting. That's a lot different from what I just read, isn't it? So, so why is this important? So, why does one say mighty men and one say giants? Well, both of those terms can be derived from the Hebrew word Gibborim, which means mighty men. So King David had his mighty men, who in that Hebrew context are called the Gibborim, mighty men. But then Gibborim has also been used to refer to the tribes of giants, like the Rephaim, God himself has his title El Gibor, meaning our God is mighty. So Gibor simply means mighty, and Giborim would be the plural, those who are mighty or the mighty ones. But it has been used to reference giants. However, it's not common for it to refer to that. But I just wanted to give you context for that because God seems to judge Babylon by saying, "My mighty men are coming to destroy you," and those, Israel, in fact, would be mighty men, David's mighty men. However, the army that God is sending to conquer the Babylonians at this time are the Medes, because these are the Persians at the time that we're talking about, and the Medes are those who are taking over. So the only one that really kind of was used in God's plan would have been and I can't remember his name. He was the one who was read the prophet of Isaiah's scroll about rebuilding the temple and God choosing him. I think it was Cyrus, who was chosen by God to send the captives back to Israel and to help them rebuild the temple. Cyrus. Or Kurush in the Persian tongue. So it's just a little interesting tidbit that I found that I thought you might like to know before we get into Revelation. The other thing that I wanted to mention, because this does talk about the future, is Nebuchadnezzar's dream that he has about the statue. And this statue represents 4 kingdoms, or really kind of 5 kingdoms, but the 5th kingdom is more of like a continuation of the 4th kingdom. And so Daniel is interpreting Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And so there's this statue, and he's got a head of gold, and its chest and its arms were of silver, its middle and thighs were of bronze, and its feet were of iron, but the toes were partly of iron and partly of clay. And so Daniel says, okay, you are the head of gold, O king. So the Persian, the Babylonian Empire was the head of gold. Then you get the Persians, who are the silver, the chest and arms of silver. Then you get down to the legs of bronze, which would be the Greeks. And then you get down to the feet, which are iron, and that's the Roman Empire. But then you get down to the toes, and in Daniel chapter 2, verse 43, it says, "As you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay." This is another part where there's kind of a change of translation of that. There are other translations that say, "They will mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they will not cling to one another." So maybe they will mingle themselves with the seed of men through marriage. But this one, I don't like this translation as much. But basically, it's talking about, again, a duality. The Roman Empire was strong and yet brittle, because as it expanded and incorporated other nations into it, it was more likely for there to be a rebellion from the inside, from those who had been taken into the empire, to work with their nations to bring down the Roman Empire from the inside, which is eventually what happened. It's what led to the Roman Empire's collapse. you grow too big, you spread yourself out over too large of an area, you wear yourself thin, and you don't have the resources to control that empire. And that's what happened. So there was a mingling of different nations within the Roman Empire, but they didn't adhere to one another, at least not well enough, and thus the fall of the Roman Empire. But if we're talking about the future, if we're talking about Revelation, and there is a rebuilding of this empire, or at least of a empire like Rome, and we take the translation that says they will mingle themselves with the seed of men. Well, first of all, who are they? Because clearly they are not the seed of men. Where did we read this before? Well, we read it in the book of Genesis, when it's talking about they saw the daughters of men that were beautiful, and they took them as wives, all of whom they chose. So remember, when we talked about the Watchers, the one reason that we know that they were not humans, and they were not the sons of Seth and the daughters of Cain, that these were something else, these were something celestial mingling with something terrestrial, and there was probably either a second incursion or a survival of some of those giants. I kind of doubt the whole survival through the flood theory, but there was probably a second incursion, which means that some set of angels attempted this a second time, or at least attempted it in a different manner. This is why I kind of got on the subject of UFOs and abductions in the last video, is because it seems like these beings are interested in our DNA and our reproductive systems. So it seems like there might be some sort of plan there to mingle themselves with our seed. And I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm just going to throw that out there as an idea, because right now I'm strictly trying to stay to what Scripture says and not introduce my own ideas. But I just want to throw that out there. We might, as I said, we might talk about that in another series, but for now, we're just going to go to Revelation. So, what does Revelation say about the giants and their disembodied spirits and the Watchers? And what's the nature of all these, and what role do they have to play in the book of Revelation? So, when we first open Revelation, we have the letters to the churches, okay? And then we move on from there to the scroll and the Lamb opening the scroll, and then we have the 7 seals, okay? So the next thing that I want to read, and it's kind of hard to see, is Revelation chapter 6, verses 12 through 15. So in Revelation chapter 6, verses 12 through 15, it says this: "When he," Jesus, "opened the 6th seal, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth, the moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth, as the fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. The sky vanished like a scroll that is being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Then the kings of the earth, and the great ones, and the generals, and the rich and the powerful, and everyone, slave and free, hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains." Okay, so we know in Revelation there's also described a great war in heaven. Now, I want to kind of postulate the theory, or the idea, that the war in heaven is not one event that happened a long time ago or that will happen in the future, but is an ongoing war that's being fought all throughout history. Throughout human history, and then even before humans, through the creation of the universe, is that the fall is not one event that just happened, but that it was an ongoing fall. There were different parts of it, and that what we are seeing here is basically the finalization of that. So we're not really given a time as to when Satan was cast out of heaven, but we do know that it says that he is thrown to the earth and he prowls about like a lion seeking whom he may devour. So it's probably more safe to assume that this happened in the past. But we do know that Satan, casts a third of the angels down with him, or that's what it says later in Revelation, and we're going to read about that. But then it says, the stars of the sky fell to the earth as the fig tree sheds its winter fruit. Okay, now I want to mention that sometimes, and I probably mentioned this before, sometimes stars is interposed for angels or heavenly host. Is that this is a word that can mean literal luminaries in the sky, stars, or heavenly host, stars. So are we talking about literal celestial bodies in outer space falling to the earth, stars crashing into the earth, which would be suns, okay, like red dwarfs and supergiant stars, like that would be unlikely? Or are we talking about something more supernatural here? I want to read you this from it's another translation of Revelation. This is the which translation is this? NIV. This is the NIV translation. Okay. And this is about the opening of the bottomless pit. Okay. This is what it says. I'm only going to read 1 and 2 of chapter 9. Okay, this is what it says. The fifth angel sounded his trumpet, and I saw a star that had fallen from the sky to the earth. The star was given the key to the shaft of the abyss. When he opened the abyss, smoke rose from it like the smoke from a gigantic furnace. The sun and the sky were darkened by the smoke from the abyss. Okay, so first of all, it says that a star fell to the earth. So you could start out by saying, okay, this is a literal, space body star, But then it says the star was given a key. So it serves a purpose, and it's given something. It's given a key to open something. And then it refers to it as he. When he opened the abyss, the shaft of the abyss. So this isn't just a, geological formation from outer space. This is an intelligent supernatural entity that has the ability and yea, the purpose of opening the shaft of the bottomless pit on the earth. I would argue that this is probably the archangel Uriel, which is talked about in the book of Enoch, who is said to be the angel who is over Tartarus. I don't have any proof of that, but that's my speculation. Okay, so we have stars that are falling to the sky, and I would argue that these stars are in fact supernatural beings, heavenly host, and in this case probably fallen heavenly host. So these are some of the first characters that we have on the scene. There are heavenly hosts that are falling to earth. Okay, and now I'd like to go to the bottomless pit. So we're going to Revelation 9. Okay, and I'm going to read for you chapter 9, verses 1 through 11. This is what it says. And the fifth angel blew his trumpet, and I saw a star fallen from heaven to earth, and he was given the key to the shaft of the bottomless pit. He opened the shaft of the bottomless pit, and from the shaft rose smoke like the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened with the smoke from the shaft. Then from the smoke came locusts on the earth, and they were given power like the power of scorpions of the earth. They were told not to harm the grass of the earth or any green plant or tree, but only those people who did not have the seal of God on their foreheads. They were allowed to torment them for 5 months, but not to kill them. And their torment was like the torment of a scorpion when it stings someone. And in those days people will seek death and will not find it. They will long to die, but death will flee from them. In appearance, the locusts were like horses prepared for battle. On their heads were what looked like crowns of gold. Their faces were like human faces, their hair like women's hair, and their teeth like lions' teeth. They had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the noise of their wings was like the noise of many chariots with horses running into battle. They have tails and stings like scorpions, and the power to hurt people for 5 months is in their tails. They have as king over them the angel of the bottomless pit. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek he is called Apollyon. Okay. It's a lot. So this star, this heavenly host, comes to the earth, or falls to the earth, and opens the shaft to the bottomless pit, which leads to Tartarus. And smoke comes out of the pit, okay? And then we have these locusts that come out. Now, this word locust is used symbolically to describe something that swarms and engulfs and destroys on a very large scale. Okay, but what comes out of these the pit are these entities, and this part is not symbolic language that I believe. I believe that this is talking about literal supernatural beings that are coming out of this pit, and they're described as looking like horses, but with a man's face and with long hair, with crowns, breastplates, teeth of a lion, and that they are going to wage war against those who do not have God's seal on them. And they can harm them, but they can't kill them. And the people who they harm are going to be in such pain and agony that they're going to want to die, they're going to seek death, and they're not going to be able to find it. So we have these entities. Interestingly enough, there is a Sumerian entity that's found on wall reliefs, and I'm going to put the picture up here, that looks just like that. They have the body of either a horse or kind of some of them have like a stork legs or some sort of bird legs, but you can see that they've got the tail of a scorpion. They've got a breastplate or the torso of a human, the face of a human with long hair, and they've got a crown on their head, and this one in particular is holding a bow and arrow. And I can't pronounce the name, at least because I don't have it in front of me, but these are sort of supernatural throne guardians, warriors for the supernatural powers and principalities. So it's fitting that they are the army of Abaddon, who is the king over these entities from the bottomless pit. Now, who is Abaddon and Apollyon? Well, his name is Destroyer. It means destroyer. Could it be Azazel? Is it one of the other Watchers? We don't know. We won't know until this scripture is fulfilled, or until Christ reveals that to us. But this is another character that comes on the set. Is that everything that we've been talking about, these Watchers that were chained up down there, in Genesis and in the book of Enoch, they are now free. And they are here for the final battle against all of humanity and against God for basically ownership of our souls and of the universe. They're not going to get it because they've already been defeated. They just don't know it yet. So then let's continue on. This is the same chapter, chapter 9, verses 13 through 21. Then the sixth angel blew his trumpet, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar before God, saying to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, "Release the four angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates." So the four angels who had been prepared for the hour, the day, the month, and the year, were released to kill a third of mankind. The number of mounted troops was twice 10,000 times 10,000. I heard their number, and this is how I saw the horses in my vision and those who rode them. They wore breastplates the color of fire and sapphire and of sulfur, and the heads of the horses were like lions' heads, and fire and smoke and sulfur came out of their mouths. By these three plagues a third of mankind was killed, and by the fire and smoke and sulfur coming out of their mouths, for the power of the horses is in their mouths and in their tails, for their tails are like serpents with heads, and by means of them they wound. The rest of mankind who were not killed by these plagues did not repent of the works of their hands, nor give up worshipping demons and idols of gold and silver and bronze and stone and wood, which cannot see or hear or walk, nor did they repent of their murders or their sorceries or their sexual immorality or their thefts. So these are more supernatural characters that have come on the scene, and that there are angels that are bound in the river Euphrates, and they seem to have armies of their own. So, who are these angels who are bound in the river Euphrates? Are these another set of watchers who were not bound maybe with Semyaza? Are these other rebellious angels that were bound and prepared for this? I mean, obviously they were prepared for this day. It says that verbatim. But we don't know their identity either. However, it seems like these might be more fallen entities rather than heavenly entities. But again, they seem to have an army with them, serving them, helping them, akin to the army that serves the angel of the bottomless pit. So, interesting. So we've already got plenty of supernatural entities and fallen heavenly host on the scene already. Okay. Now, the next thing that we're going to read, okay, is going to be about the woman and the dragon, and this is in Revelation 12. Okay, so Revelation 12, chapter 12, verses 1 through 4. This is what it says. And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head 7 diadems. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. Okay? And so, we've got a woman who could represent Israel or the church, bearing a crown, diadem of 12 stars, which could be the 12 tribes of Israel. But this woman also specifically, like the duality of each prophecy that we have come up against, also represents Mary, the mother of Jesus, and that she is with child, and Satan is ready to find this Messiah that God has prepared and eliminate it. And so Satan has taken heavenly host with him. His tail sweeps a third of the heavenly host out of heaven, and this becomes his army of angels. And they have been cast to the earth, and the dragon is standing before the woman, waiting for her to give birth so that he might devour that child. Remember, when King Herod is commanding the wise men, the Magi, who are telling him that they're going to find this child who is the new king. And Herod says, well, when you find him, come back and tell me so that I can go and worship. But really what he wants to do is kill that child, because he does not want anyone usurping his throne. I would argue that Satan, the spirit of rebellion and of Satan, was upon Herod at that time, and working through him. And so when we see Herod doing all these things, that behind this man, behind the facade, there is a spiritual entity who is manipulating him and controlling him. And this is the dragon. Okay? And I want you to also remember what we talked about in Genesis with the prophecy of the serpent and his judgment. I will put enmity between you and the woman. This is the serpent, who is now the dragon, and the woman. Okay? So we're going to continue on to verse 13 through 17. And this is what that says. And when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. But the woman was given the 2 wings of the great eagle, so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness, to the place where she is to be nourished for a time, and times and half a time. The serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, to sweep her away with a flood. But the earth came to the help of the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from his mouth. Then the dragon became furious with the woman, and went off to make war with the rest of her offspring on those who keep the commandments of God and hold the testimony of Jesus. And he stood on the sand of the sea. Okay, so the dragon pursues the woman, just like Herod pursued Mary and Joseph and Jesus, except God prepared for them a way to escape. And they did escape to Egypt, and they lived in Egypt for a while until it was safe enough to return with a young Jesus, when he was able to go into the temple and to be amongst all of the scriptures and the scrolls and the prophecies, and it ended up preaching in the temple even as a child. So here we have the fulfillment of that prophecy. So the dragon finds out that the woman has escaped him, and the Messiah as well. Okay, and so he's furious, so he goes off to persecute the rest of the woman's offspring. So the rest of humanity, but not just the rest of humanity, but the rest of the church, the rest of humanity that believes in Jesus. And so he goes off to persecute them. And so this is where we're at right now. You know, the war between the offspring of the woman and the offspring of the serpent. And so far, we've seen that he could not best the offspring of the woman as Jesus, and so he's going off to persecute the offspring of the woman as Christians. But now we have to see the offspring of the serpent. So we have to see the man of sin, and we have to see his army, his chosen people. Okay? And so the next thing that we're going to read is, I'm going to kind of touch on the first beast and the second beast. So the first beast is out of the sea, and this is the Antichrist. And it basically talks about him being given power by the kings of the earth. Okay, and it describes him as this horrible looking monster, but in fact we know that he's going to be a man. In fact, when I am talking about the man of sin, I'm going to put a picture up here. And this is a picture of, or an artist depiction of, Nimrod, and behind him is the Tower of Babel. And the reason I use Nimrod is because Nimrod is a precursor of the Antichrist. He's a prototype of the Antichrist because, like the Antichrist will do in the last days, is that he had a one world religion, one world government, one world language, probably one world currency. He had everyone working for him, working together towards some great goal. He wanted to exalt himself above God. He rebelled against God, and God threw him down and demolished his tower. So the reason I put Nimrod up here is because he has many of the qualities of what the Antichrist will have. And so this is the beast out of the sea. And then we have the beast out of the earth, which is the false prophet, which will be another man who will work closely with the man of sin in what seems to be a religious aspect, and that he will actually be helping the man of sin to convince the nations of the world through lying signs and wonders that he is to be served. And so then we have the angels with the seven plagues, the 7 bowls of God's wrath. Okay, and then we get this interesting thing in Revelation 16, verse 13, and it says, "And I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean spirits like frogs. For they are demonic spirits performing signs, who go abroad to the kings of the whole world to assemble them for battle on the great day of God the Almighty." So we get these demonic spirits that are coming out, emanating from the beast and the false prophet and from Satan himself. So this is where the demonic spirits come into play. These are the giants and the monsters, the disembodied spirits of these Nephilim from the antediluvian world that we talked about all the way at the beginning of this study, that are coming back to serve the man of sin and the dragon in their army on this world. So some, speculate that even though the kings of the earth, or at least the global leaders who choose to side with the beast in the end of days, that whereas their armies might be human, there seems to be some inclination that they might be demonically possessed. Is that these armies might harbor the spirits of those giants. Because something, just as the Holy Spirit empowers us to do our work, in those days there seems to be an unholy spirit or unclean spirit that is working in the enemies of God who are coming up against the army of the Lord. So these spirits, like frogs, go out and they gather the kings of the earth and the nations of the world to wage war. That's their purpose. All right. And now, moving along, we have Revelation 19 through 21. Okay. And this is what it says about that. This is about the rider on the white horse. "And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth with their armies gathered to make war against him who was sitting on the horse and against his army, and the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet who in its presence had done the signs by which he had deceived those who had received the mark of the beast and who worshipped its image. Those 2 were thrown alive into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur, and the rest of them were slain by the sword that came from the mouth of him who was sitting on the horse, and all the birds were gorged with their flesh. Okay, so Jesus, the rider on the white horse, captures the beast and the false prophet, throws them into the lake of fire, and everyone else in their army is slain by the word of God, slain by the sword that comes from the mouth of God, from Jesus. Okay, and then it continues in chapter 20, and it says this: Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit, once again, and a great chain. And he seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into the pit, and shut it and sealed it over him, so that he might not deceive the nations any longer, until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be released for a little while. Okay, so Satan is chained. He goes into the bottomless pit. 1,000 years pass. This is the millennial reign of Christ. This is when Christ reigns with us on the earth for 1,000 years. Satan is then allowed to come out and once again deceive some populace, which means there must be some populace outside of the city of God to be deceived. Like, in order for you to deceive someone, there have to be people to deceive, and it can't be the righteous and the elect. It has to be someone else. Okay. So this is what it says further down, chapter 20, verse 7. And when the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations that are at the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. Their number is like the sand of the sea. And they marched up over the broad plain of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city. But fire came down from heaven and consumed them, and the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet were, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. Okay, so this is basically what happens to them, is the beast and the false prophet have been dealt with. Satan is chained for 1,000 years. He's unchained to have one last go, even though it's not going to work. And then before he even gets to the city, fire rains down from heaven, engulfs his entire army, and the dragon is thrown into the lake of fire with the beast and the false prophet, and then all of the demonic spirits and the unclean spirits, and all of those who served in those armies are thrown into the lake of fire as well. And then the earth is judged. The wicked are sent with the beast and the false prophet and the dragon into the lake of fire. The righteous reign on earth with God, and Jesus brings us the new heavens and the new earth, free of sin, free of sadness, free of any sort of wickedness or darkness, and there is nothing but perfect beauty and love forever and ever. And this is the good news, is that that's what we have to look forward to, is the new Jerusalem, the new heavens, and the new earth. So we went all the way from the beginning, from Genesis, from the fall when everything went wrong, and the appearance of the Watchers, the fallen host of heaven, and their offspring, the offspring of the serpent, all the way through the Bible, through this cosmic chess match, through this war that has been waged throughout all of human history, all the way up to Revelation, when the serpent and his offspring are defeated finally. Sin is no more, the wounds are healed, the earth is healed, all of creation is healed, in fact, and God reigns with man, and everything is as it was created to be. The end. So, and I say that like the end, because, who knows what God has in store for us through eternity. We don't know what plans he has, but we do know that they are going to be wonderful and perfect. So that's basically it. That's where I leave you guys, is with the good news at the end of Revelation, that everything that we've been talking about, the giants of antiquity, their fallen fathers, are going to be done away with, and that even though they did have a part to play in the tribulation and the end times, is that God is in control. He has always been in control, and he declared the end from the beginning, and that's the wonderful thing that we have to look forward to, is that God knows the plans that he has for us, plans for a hope and for a future, and for us to prosper. So that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. In the next episode, I'm just going to do a brief recap. It's going to be a very short episode, and then I'll tell you about the next series that's coming up for the Fulfilling Reign studies, and I hope that you will enjoy that as much as I will. So to each and every one of you that has followed me all this way, I want to say thank you very much. I hope that you will recommend this study to your friends and to your family. Pass the word. We got to get more, subscribers to this channel. So go out, tell everyone. There will be more content coming up, probably on Sunday, and then after that, I'll get working on some new stuff, some new studies. So God bless every last one of you on the other side of this screen. Have a great rest of the week. Bye-bye.